to have them, and the meeting is being recorded, as you all heard, I think, at the same time as I did. So I will pass the floor to them, but just a little bit of house rules. We're going to have them speak for about an hour, and then we're going to have an hour of question and answer. I mean, feel free to use the chat while they're speaking, but we will not be interrupting that first hour of the talk. And then for the question and answer period, it's usually hard to keep track of raising hands and the chat at the same time. So what I'm gonna suggest and ask everyone to do is that if you want to ask your question in person, if you could just type that on the chat as well, so I can keep track of people who want to ask questions in person and the comments, at least the order. That will be easier to do. But I will remind all of that before we start the question and answer. So please join me in welcoming our speakers for today, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for having us. We already talked about it. We will do it a little bit differently because I'll do like a 20-minute session, and then we have a short discussion, and then Stefan will do a 20 minutes presentation. So because we have two different topics and they're both important, so then but they're interlinked, but they're not the same. So it makes sense to separate it for a short while at least. Yeah. I'm Sutterlütti. I'm like working on alternatives to capitalism for a long time. I thought I was alone with Stefan for a long time, but now there are many others, and we are really happy to have the opportunity to discuss and to further enhance or develop the different models. And yes, I will focus on the question of voluntariness or wage labor in my part of the lecture. And I brought a presentation with me. I hope all of you can see it. I think it works. Yes. I'll call it the case for communism or communism, as you prefer, or anarchism. For me, labels are not that important, but just we call it communism because it's for us a combination of the commons, that is like our background in theory, but also like in our practical struggles, what we do. But also to have the tradition linked to communism and the whole socialist and communist tradition that is also important to us. And it's an argument for the higher stage because traditionally, you know, that like the concept with the traditional Marxist conception is there is the lower stage of communism where there's still wage labor and to each according to their performance or to their work. And then there's the higher stage where it's to each according to their needs and work is done voluntarily. And our model is kind of singled out from a lot of different or most of the other models because we have no wage. Like people just do things because it's important to them and not because they're paid for it. And I will argue now why this is like central. Okay. So I will argue that the wage-based planned economy is a capitalist system and not a socialist one. And the denomination of exchange value produces inefficiency, patriarchy, and a consumptive subjectification that's in contrast to what we want. And then I will argue a little bit who the question I get from everybody, be they liberals or anarchists or whoever, is then who does the unpopular work? And I will talk a little bit about this. So first, what is capitalism? Because I think it's important because different post-capitalist alternatives have a different concept of capitalism in their center. And I think there are three main ideas. Capitalism is a society where the means of production are private. Capitalism is a system where the market dominates the reproduction. And capitalism is a system where there's a compulsion to work via wage labor. And this means that care labor is separated in a different sphere of the society. And the exchange value rules over the use value. I'll go in depth there. But if you just take these three elements, then people that center on the market as the dominating sphere, they want an eco-social market economy where the market is just reduced in size. Then you would have the market socialists. They want to keep the market, but want to get rid of the means of production as private. And then you have I would say these both are kind of linked because they are centered on a market economy. It's just are the means of production owned by capitalists or shareholders or whatever, or the workers, but the market is the defining feature of coordination, although in market socialism, you have a much stronger state usually. And then there's the second big idea that's usually talked about when we talk about democratic planning, and we call it command economy, or because command in a way central to the structure, not only the command in its hierarchical structure, but also to command people to do stuff via wage labor. And the third one is, we call it post-wage society. You could call it communism, whatever. It's not important to me, but they focus on all three parts of the definition of capitalism, I would say. So, and in this thinking, what is central is that the market economy and the democratic command socialism are not opposites, but they're part of one line. On the one hand, you have like a completely free market economy, then you have some state intervention, a Green New Deal, a little bit more state intervention with eco-social market economy, then you have very strong state intervention and the collectivization of ownership in the market socialism. Then you have a capitalist command economy that's now, for example, in Germany, there's Ulrike Herrmann who proposes it there, where the state tells companies what to do, and what you had in, for example, the British war economy. And then you have democratic command socialism. And what binds these systems together is that they're all centered on wage labor and money, and we would also say commodity production, although it's not in the center of my talk. I will focus on wage labor because this is what most of the people that are in this model agree to, that there is wage labor and it's important to have it. So first, I'll take a step back to the real socialism, just some empirical findings I think most of you are familiar with, but I'll do it anyway because just to be on the same page. Also, liberal economists or historians find out that within the real socialism, and I take GDR, is like I'm also economic historian, and my focus is the GDR. There is this contradiction between state priorities versus company or employee egoism, it's called, that the state wants one thing and the employees and the companies want another. And the directors deceive the planning authorities with apparently considerable success about their actual performance in order to simplify plan fulfillment and secure bonuses. These company egoist policies were so-called soft plans. An example which means that plans whose fulfillments did not require top performances from the factories. And the effect of this is a planned poker, a game of hide and seek between the company and the head office, the state. I think all of you know about this. And this is like what the liberals put in the center in their critique of democratic planning. And I think they have a point in it. Because, and I would explain this by the domination of the exchange value. In capitalism, individuals strive for the highest share of value, which is usually, like Marx said, it's you can see it as money. The companies strive for profit, and the workers primarily for wages. Workers do also work because it's important to them, because they want to be part of the supermarket, or they want to produce cars or whatever. But the primary motivation to do stuff within capitalism is wages. And also in a lot of democratic planning models, the prime motivation is or are wages. The enterprises strive for bonuses, resources, and money or credits, for example, in Kochel-Cottrell, and their higher production capacities produce lower quality and delay the products. The workers strive for higher wages and bonuses. And you can see this is like opposed to a use value orientation, and the state within the real socialism had the role to enforce use value orientation or the consumption side. and try to make the companies produce higher quality, to produce on the right time, to strengthen their capacities, to become more productive, and all this kind of stuff. So you will find in these societies a contradiction between enterprise and individual rationality versus societal rationality. And what will you find more is a money-based incentive structure to bind the individual rationality to societal rationality. And I get in more detail there. The use value orientation within the real socialism appears only in the form of an external state bureaucratic supervision. It's no longer in the shape of the coercive laws of competition, as Marx calls it. Therefore, it can be deceived, tricked, and perforated in 1,000 different ways. And that's like the central, what we would argue is, the Marxist school that we come from, is that it is a capitalist system that got rid of one element of capitalism, and that's the competition side, or the market side, you could call it. And then the state has to do all the things that the market or the competition did before. But the state doesn't do it in the same way. Because it is a socialist state, it uses no economic whip against the workers. There are low income differentiations, and there's literally no unemployment within real socialism. And also the new models, they hold to this socialist idea. And you have no economic whip against the enterprises. There are minimum profit differentiations within the GDR and no possibility to go bankrupt because it belongs to the people. What you have then in the whole history of the GDR, but also the Soviet Union and in China, is reformists asking for the material interests for the workers to play a more dominant role, which means that if they work harder, they get more money. If they don't work that hard, they get less money or unemployed or whatever, and for the enterprises. So although the real socialism is usually politically very authoritarian in a way, it's economically, it's a lot softer than a market economy because it gets rid of the competition side. It gets rid of the competition and this market structure, and therefore has a lax incentive structure in the economy. Here we can see people playing Skat. It's like a card game that was like, it's kind of, you use it to describe the GDR because people were waiting a lot of time for products to arrive so that they can continue production, and they played a lot of Skat within the enterprises because of the inefficiency. So, and now I want to do to link this to one modern model. I am writing now a paper for we have a planning focus in one of the Marxist newspapers within Germany, and there describe Cockshut, Cottrell, and Devine, and I'll just do it with Pat Devine here, with his model of negotiated coordination. I think most of you are familiar with it. So there's this new thing, there's a lot more democracy and no party structure that tells people what to do and what we are going for. There's much more decentrality with these negotiated coordination bodies. And there's a pseudo competition, which means that an enterprise, they sell at the prices that they choose and they buy from the people they want to, but in the end, not the market decides who gets more money and who can grow or has to falter or get smaller, but the negotiated coordination bodies, they decide where the invention, where the innovation and the investment goes. So the investment function is kind of collectivized within these negotiated coordination bodies. Let's just say that the enterprises in this model are not completely different from real socialist enterprises, and I think they're not because they're kind of in the same planning structure, and they try to do a little bit of inefficiency. And we take the example of an uneconomic shoe enterprise in Wales. We could call it Nike, but whatever you want to call it. The first competition these enterprises is with the other shoe enterprises within Wales. They strive within their negotiated coordinating bodies. They try to get more resources because they're not as efficient as the others and sell less shoes is not a problem. because if they still get enough power within the negotiated coordination body, the competition still can be turned to their advantage in a way. They are less efficient, but if they have the power in the negotiated coordination body, that's not a big problem. They still get all the investment that they need to continue their production or even grow bigger, because they argue we have a lot of ecological stuff that we're doing, or we employ disabled people, and that's why we're not as efficient, and all these kind of stuff. They can use a lot of socialist goals that they just tell that they're doing to get investment or to secure investment for their enterprise. But they don't only fight in Wales against other enterprises that are part of the same negotiated coordination body, but as part of the regional negotiated coordination body of Wales, they fight together with the other enterprises against all the other negotiated coordination bodies that are in Scotland or in England or whatever, so that they gain more and more resources for Wales and can grow there and produce more, and or just secure their jobs. So you have, as you can see there, you have a lot of competition there, but it's not a market competition. It's inside this planning structure. You will see all these people striving for exchange value and competing with each other, but in a different way. And you also have it, of course, on a national level, because all these regional consumption negotiated coordination bodies, they are then with divine structure, they are then all put together in one national negotiated coordination body for the consumption sector. And then this consumption sector, of course, or body will fight with all the others that are producing energy or healthcare or whatever over the resources within the society. This is, in general terms, is kind of okay. Within a socialist or a communist society, we will have conflicts about how much resources should we put into the energy sector, how much resources should we put into shoe production or into healthcare or whatever. The problem is here that the conflicts are not about the use value. They are about the exchange value. Because just take the example of a healthcare emergency, where it's clear that the healthcare sector, they need resources. The people won't, their primary motivation to be against giving more resources or like giving resources away to the healthcare sector is not because they think it doesn't make sense as use value orientation, but because they want to secure their jobs, their wages, their privileges, and all this kind of stuff. So it's basically the exchange value they're fighting for, not the use value. And this is what twists these conflicts within a democratic planned society that's based on wage structures around all the time. Of course, the society can then go for microtization. And this is what is really, like, for me, it was hard to see in the GDR that the people that were like, they were socialists in their heart, some of them at least, authoritarian socialists, and what they asked for is we have to learn from the capitalists because they now know how to do it with putting the enterprises under pressure, with putting the people to work. So the marketization could go like this. You have more competition that's not a pseudo competition, but a real competition between the enterprises. The companies get less power in the negotiated coordination bodies, and therefore they can't just wriggle their way out of inefficiency. And for sure, you will have company corruption, like companies working together as they did in GDR and the real socialists to just lower the expectations on the performance within the sector, be there shoes or healthcare or whatever. And I already can see it that you have these corrupt companies that are just striving for the individual bonuses and not for the societal good or the social good. Central to this is, in the end, the carrots and sticks for workers, because usually what these models focus on is carrots and sticks for the enterprises. Literally all models that I know about, they have a pseudo competition that wasn't there in real socialism, because they say, we have to put kind of a pressure on the enterprises. What they really don't want to do, and this is because they're socialists, they don't want carrots and sticks for workers. But to really make this work, to really give the enterprises the power to really suppress or to gain efficiency within the enterprises, they need the carrot and sticks for the workers, at least in a way. So I would argue that it's the same system as a real socialism, and it's basically a capitalist system where still the use, this exchange value is dominant, and the people are, and all the conflicts and the contradictions within the society is not based on us discussing where our resources should go in a use value or in a needs-based environment, but it's about money and privileges and wages and all this kind of stuff again. Just not in a market term, but here in a decentral negotiated coordination-based idea. So to sum it up, I would say that there's a capitalist base with wage labor domination of exchange value. Within the market capitalism, this is coordinated by market competition, market prices. Within the command economy, it's coordinated by command planning and plan incentives, and these can be centralized, as with Cockshott-Cottrell, or more democratic or decentralized. It's not democratic, it's just decentralized with Devine or Pericon. And I would say we need a communist base that's based on voluntariness, and the only motivation why people should work is use value, because they think it's important and not because they're paid for it. And then you still can discuss, should it be central, decentral, or polycentral planning? And what we would put forward is a decentral or polycentral planning approach, but that's only a planning approach within the structure of a communist society. You could also have, or I think Stefan would disagree, you could have a centralized communist approach to it, that you just take Cockshott and Cottrell model, but get rid of the credit and token system, and people just, for example, everybody get 1,000 credits each month, and it doesn't matter if they work or don't work. It's like not performance-based income. Okay, just furthermore problems, but this is like the central thing, and to lower the pressure on workers. Usually all these models have UBI or UBS, Universal Basic Income, or Universal Basic Services, but these disrupt the wage function. The wage function is there to get the people there where we need, for example, into the healthcare or wherever. And the higher the UBI and the UBSs, the less the function of the wage works. And the functionality of the wage is built about pressuring people to do things that they probably don't want to do themselves or that they don't think important. And that's why the people usually argue that wage is so important. And the UBI and UBS disrupts this. So I think you will have, as we have in capitalism, UBI and UBS or it's not around, but where you have, as in Germany, where you have a welfare state that kind of supports people that are not working right now. I think it will be not that high, because if it's high or rising, then it disrupts the wage function. You also have a consumptive subjectification, where consumption is thought of the freedom and a kind of appreciation from the society, where it tells you, we really like what you're doing, now you get a Mercedes, or you get the money to buy a Mercedes or a nice house. And this is why also the Western bananas within the GDR Germany contest, it was very important, were something so important to the people in the GDR. They had the same subjectification, basically. They worked to gain money, to consume. And what the Western model did a lot better is offered more consumption possibilities. And this is in contradiction to what we want. Ecology will mean sufficiency and will mean a reduction in the global north in the consumption. I think that at least I think it will be like this, especially if we take into account that we talk about global justice, where the income and the wealth has to be spread in a very different way. This means the reduction of consumption in the global north. And with people that have this consumptive subjectification, you have a really big problem, because you take away the central freedom or realm of freedom to them. It's also a society that's still based, that Silvia Federici calls wage patriarchy. And also this whole concept of wages for housework, that's like the usual concept how you, in these models where there's still a wage-based model, kind of doesn't really work, because you have still a secession within the society because between paid labor and unpaid labor. And then you always have the discussion, what is work credible? Is it work credible to look after babies? Yes, it is. Is it work credible to look after my friends if they have a mental breakdown? Should they get paid for it? So you always have the discussion, what is really paid, what should be paid by the society and what shouldn't. Then you have, as you can see in capitalism, the exchange logic. If it gets into the care sector, you really get big problems because they're different logics. It shouldn't be just together. And I think the care labor will be the underdog, because care labor is, and especially privatized care or private care labor within families and friendships and everything, is done by the people because it's just important to them. And it's not motivated by wages. So you will always have, if there, and there will be conflicts about where the resources and the wages go to. And then I'm sure you will have the discussion, okay, then the wages for housework, we can just go down with this because people will do it anyway. Okay, so in communism, this would be to each according to needs. I think centrally is that the compulsion to work is justified by its effects. We live in a society where compulsory labor and its organization of work undermines or destroys motivation, and therefore it kind of makes sense. You see, people don't want to do things voluntarily. Of course they don't, because this is like how this naturalization of a wage society works. Like, you just point out to the society and see who will go into the who will do this work voluntarily. Nobody, because it's not organized according to your needs, but according to exploitation. Central to our approach is the concept of productive needs that comes from critical psychology and Klaus Holzam. That doesn't mean there's a need for production, but a need for provisioning. And Holzam writes, work as such is not the first need of life, but work only insofar as it allows the individual to participate in the disposal of the social process, thus giving him or her agency. I can't go into detail there, but I have some videos where I explain it in more detail. What do we do about the unpopular work? We have 5 possibilities. We can reorganize it, because usually within a wage-based planned economy, you also have to pay the people more if they do things that nobody else wants to do, so that the people will do it. You have it more or less in all models. Also in this society, more resources will go into the unpopular work, but it doesn't go as a wage differential, but it goes as an innovation or reorganizing of this special kind of work. Of course, you can automate it within the ecological boundaries that you have and get rid of it. If it's ecologically possible, and I don't have to tell you, but in capitalism, automation is not need-based. You can divide it and rotate it on a voluntary basis. And there always comes the discussion, what about social norms? And then my friends always say, I want to live in a communist commune where it's clear that we all work 4 hours a day. And Stefan and me think it's a civilizational downgrade if we have the social norms, because what is when people don't fulfill them? They just can't go to the swimming pool, or can't go to the cinema or whatever. But they often come up as ideas. And there's always sufficiency. Within such a society, we really have to think about, is it worth it? Is the work worth it? Is our resource, our time worth producing whatever? Strawberries. A friend of mine is gardener, and she says strawberries are definitely not worth the work because it's so hard and it can't be automized. So it's just an example, but to make you think. This I will leave behind. Then to finish with Marx, let us suppose that we have produced as human beings. The only motivation for people within a society based on voluntariness is use value. So all the discussions you have within Divine's model, for example, or our model, or Koksha are based on the use value, about the needs, and not about wages, and not about privileges, and not maybe about privileges, but not about monetary privileges. The conflicts are also then in the term of use value. And there's a new richness in consumption and work, because you can't just tell people, okay, we need an ecological lifestyle and you have to consume in a different way. But we have to, as Marxists, we have to change the material basis of this society. And this means getting rid of wage labor. And then we have a very different approach to consumption and work. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Simone, for this very stimulating and interesting presentation. Now I want to open the floor to questions and comments. Whatever you want to do you want to raise your hand or use the chat? I will keep track of the order, so don't be shy. Roland, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for your talk. At a certain point, I had to stop writing because it was so much, and then I started trying to think, and so thanks a lot. So I had to think about a model I was taught at university by Hartmut Elsenhans. It's called state class. This guy went, basically he started his academic career in Algeria. So a socialist state, but not in the so-called Eastern Bloc. After revolution, getting independent from France, they basically built up a socialist country and they failed totally. And the result we see today. And basically what you described was there's a lot from which this state class model then derived. And the point is, it was, in my understanding as a, how to say, humble student of political science, the problem was less based on the question of why individual people work. So this kind of question, sorry, so I'm taking this kind of wage labor focus, but the question of the redistribution of socially produced surplus. So the need of the society to discuss collectively what to do with surplus, which is not immediately being consumed, but being reinvested. And then you have a politicization, and then you have basically all the things, all the, let's say, alternative structures in the habitus of Bourdieu, that it's not only a financial capital you want to, how to say, accumulate by working, but basically it's about power. So the problem of the state class and the failure of socialism in Algeria was not on this question of motivation of people to go to work, but the question of, we have a priori a surplus in society and where to get it from. So the problem was on a different level, so to say. That's just as a idea. And again, thanks a lot.
I'm not sure if I should answer now. I'll just, we take some, maybe Thomas can also say something and then I can answer both of them.
Sure, that sounds good. Thomas, are you ready to jump in? We can't hear you. I don't know if it's your mic or because you're not muted, but.
Okay, I'll just answer to Roland then, and Thomas, you can get your mic fixed while I'm doing this.
Maybe now. Hello?
Yes, that works. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so I read the paper that got sent, and I mean, there's a lot we could say about it, but I think page 11 stuck out the most, where you talk about having trying to do planning regionally or locally, which to me just sounds like the Sovnarkos system in the Soviet Union under Khrushchev. Like, how do you propose to tackle the environmental question with I think you call it like a small planning structure, which sounds precisely like what they tried to do under Khrushchev. And especially like when we're talking about the environment, things like energy, electricity, and so on, which touches on every single part of the productive process, like everything that's in the basic sector, construction and so on, is not really something you can plan orthogonally. It all affects everything. So I'm like curious how you propose to do that, because to me it just seems like reconstituting like the deficiencies of the Soviet system, which like the fact that it has to run on a series of meetings that just slows everything down, it introduces delays in the systems and so on. So yeah, I think that's my main question.
Yeah. Just to answer this question shortly, that's not the focus of my talk. This Stefan will be about this. It will be about.
Oh, okay.
So if it's okay,
Yeah.
I'll just.
Yeah. Okay. Well, consider it aimed at Stefan then.
Yeah, probably have a similar question afterwards, after Stefan's talk, but then we can talk about it in more detail, I think. So just as answer to Roland, there's this usual, I think in the Parikon model, it's very central, this idea of within the Soviet Union, you have a state class. It's still a class society, and not there. It's maybe also a capitalist society, but basically it's a class society where the state class has all the power. And what we try to do is to not focus in a class centrist way. It's our critique is not about it's a state class and that's the problem of this society, because it then turns it only into a democratic or political problem. We would argue that even if these people up there making the decisions about the surplus would be democratically elected or would represent all the needs of the society, you would have the same problems. It's within the political economic structure and not the political structure. That's like what our main thing is about. And I don't know, I don't know the historical details, but I think you always have the discussion of what we do with a surplus, where it should go to. And you would also have it in a communist society that's built on voluntariness, but you would have it in a different way. But yeah, that's all I can say because I don't know more about historical things. Sorry.
All right. Sophie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. My question is quite simple. I guess I would just like you to dive a bit more into like a precise example, or I guess just thought experiment about what happens about these jobs and these tasks that we might, try hard to, or find it hard to find people to do. And kind of these things that are a bit more tedious and that like you said, in a wage society kind of is the purpose, like motivating people for these kind of tasks is kind of one of the main purposes of wages. And I guess my question is also how to imagine a system based on voluntariness. How do we think it could, I guess, not reproduce what is happening now in all unpaid labor, which is the fact that these tasks are often taken by people that feel the most responsible for it. And so I guess, yeah, these reflections and this question, and I'm happy to hear whatever you have to say about that.
Yeah, I will, because there are two questions, I will just answer them now. Yes. So if you have an unpopular work, be it we usually it's this general thing that we use as garbage collection, but we were criticized a lot for it because obviously garbage collection is not something some people like it, but we can do like canal cleaning or whatever, like things that really nobody wants to do. Sewer cleaning, maybe somebody wants to do sewer cleaning, whatever. So you would have these 5 steps that we had. First, you would say, can we reorganize it in a way that it's need-based? So that it's in a way, it's organized that people can say, okay, I don't love it, but I will do it anyway. Because productive needs is also about not only doing the things that you really want to do, but if things are important enough for you. And that's also where the productive need of the critical psychology comes from. As human beings, we're evolutionary beings. And just imagine humans would have never survived if they had no drive at all to do something. And that's like the central thing of the Homo economici, or how the capitalist makes us, is that we are worker bearers and consumption driven. We only do when we are paid to do it. And critical psychology states there is kind of something that we want to do things that is important to us, and not also if they're still weary, they take a lot of time and they're hard. So the first thing would be reorganization, but it's also what we talked about, division and rotation. I think nobody would clean the sewers like 5 days a week for the next 30 years, but this would be something that we really share, that like people do it 1 day a week and then more people do it, or we try to automate it. So if it's like ecologically possible, but I kind of just concretize the steps that I made beforehand. But this is like, we would use these 5 criteria or 4 criteria basically to see what can we do with this work. And it's just a different approach, because within wage, we can just pay people to do stupid stuff or the unpopular stuff. We just make them do it. And usually will also be in capitalism, of course, it's the less privileged. In a socialist society, it may be not the less privileged, but it will be better paid probably, or hopefully. But still, it's kind of forcing people to do stuff instead of changing how the work is organized. And this is like the main thing, how we, like, it's a kind of a material answer to a material problem. There's work that people don't want to do. How could we change this work, or how can we divide it up? Ursula Le Guin says that every 10th day should do work for the community. That's like a social norm, because when people don't do it, then they get kicked out of the commune. But this is like, if we have these norms that people have to do like every 10th day something they really don't want to do, that it's not enforced by kicking them out of the commune, and it could also be an orientation. And the thing that you mentioned afterwards is like essential to a feminist critique of our model. It's only available in German, I think, but it's a really good critique of Daniel Serros and our model. And what Heide Luthers points out there is really the contradiction between freedom and justice. That if people just are allowed to do what is important to them, then all the patriarchal subjectivization kicks in, and usually it will be LGBTIQ or like women doing the work because they feel more responsible for the stuff. And this is essentially, it's about I think it's about social norms and about organizing this in a different way. It's patriarchy will not be just, won't end with communism, but we have very different way to deal with it. Because of course, then these people will find out it's always us doing the stupid stuff because we feel more responsible. And then these people can go on strike and discuss it and bring it into discussion. But it's not something, as you say, there is no clear answer to this. It will just vanish. It will happen, and we will have conflicts about it, I think, within the society. It's
Thank you.
yeah, it's
Right.
not a satisfying answer, I think.
Okay, Simon first, and then there's a question by Charles that I will read out after Simon's question. So maybe Simon, the other Simon, can address both of them, and then we can pass it on slowly, kind of warm up into Stefan's part of the talk, because we're already kind of 45 minutes in. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I'll do this quickly. This notion of willingness or voluntarily doing work, how do you envision this in a complex society where institutions and organizations are doing stuff that we don't always see the consequences or the benefits of in a very day-to-day basis? We organize work in societies and in institutional context. If I had in the morning to think about everything that should be done for me to live in an interesting life in my society, I would have a lot of things to think about. We build institutions and norms and rules in our institutions that not always correspond to my personal, individual, and egoistic will, but that are still good for me, even though I don't know that it's good for me. It's called institution for something. And I don't see how I would like you to develop on the institutional aspect of complex society and this notion of will.
To add to that, or do you want to take that on and then okay, so I'll read out Charles' question on the chat. He apologizes for missing the first 15 minutes of your presentation and if you address this issue in the first half. But do you believe Che Guevara's writings on the new man, that is a human purely motivated by moral motives instead of need-based incentives, could be useful to expand the discussion of your work? And if I may add one more to the stack of questions, and perhaps like this could be kind of addressed, or you can take this up in conjunction with Simon's question. And I want to ask about kind of the kind of how dynamic is like your thinking, or like how much of a space your thinking around this issue allows for dynamism, in the sense that, first of all, the idea that like there are jobs that nobody wants to do unless like they're motivated by consumption. I mean, ideally, the kind one of the aims of revolution is to change that, like change that thinking, change that relation around work, right? I mean, and that kind of that we all want to do it because it is a use value question. So do you foresee that like at some point through these institutional arrangements, people's like subjectivities around work will also change? Because it's also kind of part of a lot of the debates around, like, for instance, Rudolf Barrow's kind of idea of like rotation. That's kind of both kind of an inequality destroying mechanism, but also like relating, like kind of cleaning the floor is not something that we don't want to do anymore. Like our relationship to that kind of jobs also changes. And the second part is that if we are actually like in a society that produces, like, that is geared towards production for needs and use values, some of these jobs, like the sewers in your terminology, will not be as dirty maybe. So like the waste production, like some of the jobs, some of the tasks, some of the kind of negative externalities of productive activities will not be the same as we kind of can think of right now. So the jobs that no one will want to do will be different. They will look different. Their material kind of burden, time burden will be different. So what do you think about that? And the third really small comment is that, have you seen the movie Perfect Days? Because it's based on basically someone who has immense joy in cleaning toilets, like public bathrooms. Like, so that's just kind of, maybe it's like you could use that as an anecdote in a presentation. So I'll give it to you, and then after that we're gonna like, if you can wrap it up in like 6 to 8 minutes, we'll then switch to Stefan.
I'll do my best. I'll start with Che Guevara. I haven't read it, but I will use the comment to do something different. What is central to our approach is a non-moral approach. And this is like difficult for some people because they understand other models something else. What we try to do is, our main question is about the logic of inclusion. How could a society be organized that it makes individually sense to include others and not exclude others by exploiting them, externalizing costs, or whatever. So this is like our main question, and voluntariness is one of our main points or answers to it, because as long as you can force people to do stuff, you can exclude their needs within the organization of the work, within the organization of conflicts or whatever. But if you have the only basis is motivation, then you have to include the needs of the workers. There's just no discussion about it. They won't show up if they don't think it's important. So morality is really something that we really criticize a lot. It's not, we don't want something, a utopia where we have like nice people, then we think about it. We want a dirty utopia where people are like how they are, and then we ask how could we create a logic of inclusion? But yeah, I'm still thinking that you will learn interesting thing about Che Guevara from Che Guevara. Okay, complexity. It wasn't in your thing, but often it comes up if it's only based on my will. I would say it's based on your motivation. Then how will people go just decide in the morning, no, today I won't go to work because it's not that important? And I think it's really important to understand that the motivation of people is built about creating use value. And this means going also to the hospital and doing your 10-hour shift because the hospital is something that really makes sense to you and should work. Now, your main point was about things that don't make sense on a day-to-day basis. And for me, it's really difficult to imagine what kind of work would this be. Of course, you don't mean bullshit jobs, obviously, but all the institutions that we build in a socialist or communist society would make kind of sense. And the people can understand that it makes sense to do this stuff. I think it's really crazy. It's the other way around in capitalism. When I talk at people for example, cashiers in the supermarket, they say that their job makes sense to them. Although they do kind of a job where I think it's difficult to imagine that there's a productive need that is satisfied there. But it keeps the system going. It keeps consumption going and all. Thanks, Eric. So we would have to go more in depth, because I think in the end the institutions make sense to the people, and that's why they do it. And it's not only about a spontaneous will, I want to do stuff, but I commit myself. I will work in this hospital 3 days for the next 10 years or 5 years or 2 years or whatever. I think commitment will be a strong part also in communism, because you have to be clear if people will show up. You can't organize work when people don't show up. Okay, so now Bengi, revolution will change our subjectivity. But this is, I do in another paper where I write about Lenin's idea of the subordinates. You know, this when people showed up on Saturday and just did things because it was important to them, like free labor on Saturday. And he's like, wow, this is where communism starts. And then he's like, all the other leaders later, what in GDR happens to subordinates is that it's kind of something that you have to do and nobody really likes to do it. And I would call it's not something that I think subjectivity changes, but in the GDR, they had a very similar notion of this, that people should do it for the use value, but they didn't do it. And then they criticized them and said, we need more socialist discipline, work discipline. We should change the subjectivity. And for me, as I said, our subjectivity will change the revolution. But for me, it's kind of idealistic that there's a material problem. People go to work because they need the money to buy things that they want. And then you come up and say, it's the problem of the people and you have to change their mental institutions. And for this I want a material solution to material problems, like to put it like bluntly, but of course, there's more to it. And the other things it makes completely sense. Also does garbage collection, and a lot of work just won't be there, and there would be other work, a lot of discussion, for example. And this And I think just a lot of work won't be there, and all these bullshit jobs that Graeber writes about. And so it will be a very different society because it's need-based. The work makes a lot more sense. Yeah, and I don't know the movie, but I would like to watch it. Okay, I'll finish here at 5 o'clock. Thank you
right
for
on time. No, thanks everyone for the great comments, but we have another hour to go, so I'll pass it to Stefan if he's ready to go. And as before, we'll probably have half an hour, 20 minutes to half an hour of Stefan talking, and then we'll have another round of discussion.
How can I share my screen? Share screen and then?
And then you should select the window that you want to share.
Yeah, you see it, right?
We do.
Okay, then I will start. Yes, my talk is more about planning, but based on what Simon already told to us. So I want to use this picture because I find it so nice. It's about social metabolism, and it's from Buko, Vienna, and they made this beautiful image, which gives a picture of what we need for societal transition. But I want to start with social metabolism or social metabolic planning, and this is a term I pick up from you, and I want to take the link starting from your words and coming to our words because it's so close. So as I understand it, the concept of social metabolism has 4 dimensions, not only production and consumption, but extraction, production, consumption, and waste treatment or sink recovery and so on. The important thing is, as you had explained, these various aspects of social metabolism are incommensurable. So you cannot bring them into a single unit of account to manage them, because this is what produces the catastrophic scenario, global catastrophic scenario we face today. So the diversity of social metabolism needs a multiplicity of indicators. But the question is, what does multiplicity means? So what I want to propose is the broadest way you can think of it. It's the mediation, the planning and mediation in kind. You never use reductionist indicators. The most reductionist indicator is the single unit of account. But other indicators could also be reductionist. So what I want to propose, what we want to propose, is to use the use values themselves as mediation means. So planning and mediation in kind. It's important to understand that the goods themselves embody the process, how they are getting to produce, and the use purpose, the purpose of. So the goods themselves are carriers of information. So we have a close link to the goods. The goods represent our needs and the way they are getting to produced. The quantities are always related to qualities, and this is different to a unit of account where you have a pure quantity. The quantities are always related to qualities, be it the amount of steel or electricity or the qualification of workers, and so on and so on. And if you're starting from these, then you have mediation with 2 aspects in our model. You have mediation in situ, which means you are mediate and plan in the same information space. In capitalism, you have 2 information spaces. You have the space of what it is used for, the use value, and how is it mediated, the money mediation. But here you have the advantage that you use the same information space. And it's ex ante planning. You plan before you produce. And this is also important because ex post production means you never know if it's going to be used or thrown away. So the challenge for an in-kind mediation system is to transport and use the multidimensionality of the information as automatically processable data, because you cannot transport or deal with the multidimensionality of the information by hand. That's not possible. You can count money, of course. We have a computer for this, but it's said that this is the advantage of money. It reduces everything to one dimension, and you can treat it by yourself. That's true. So on the other hand, if we use the multidimensionality of information, we need an automatically processed data system. The precondition to work in a society on a societal basis is complete information transparency and the access to automatically condensed information for all, at least, and at least for the ones who need the information to make decisions. These mediation in kind can be used, Simon told about that, can be used for central, decentral, or polycentral planning. For example, in 1919, Neurath is first coming up with an in-kind planning model around the socialist calculation debate, and his model was a central model. But our model is a polycentral model. How can we? We have to distinguish between two levels of planning. First, we call it target planning. Planning about the goals, what do we want to reach? And there we have 5 dimensions for this target planning. First, we have to define the product that meet our needs. Then we have to make sure that our inputs we need to produce that product is available, materials, energy, intermediate products, and so on and so on. Then we have to think about how to treat the byproducts and waste. What do we do with that? And then we have also integrate societal goals, which are not coming from the immediate production as in capitalism, but stemming from societal goals. For example, we want to limit emissions, we want to recover things, and we want good working conditions and something like that. And not only that, we have to, if we are thinking of a complex production system with production chains, then we have to be aware that our partner groups are also in compliance with these local and global goals when they provide material, when they provide energy and intermediates, because we don't want to ignore how they produce our products we use for further production. We have to think of the whole production chain. And then, and if this is given, then we have the level of operational planning. This is the design and construction of the specific process and so on. This is the easy thing in quotes. But this can only start after the target planning has been completed. So here's an image, a sketch. You see on the left side or on the bottom, you see the people, for example, needing a hospital to get treated when they are ill or something like that. And the hospital needs some devices, some medical devices to do the treatments in the hospital. And the device producer needs some intermediate products, and these intermediate producers need some machines and so on and so on. It's a production chain. And we can see that, we can see that we have 2 flows. We have the flow of information between the producers, and we have the material flow of the intermediate products and so on of the machines. So what we can do is to use protocols. I come to that in a second. We use protocols to mediate all these levels of production, because before we can start producing, we have to know that we will get delivered by the producers above us. We get the machines, we will get the machines, and so on. And at the same time, we have to be sure that societal goals are implemented in the planning. So now I come to these protocols because they are really, really important for the models, the role of protocols. Because communist protocols replace the stupid price protocol. They mediate the reproduction process overall. They allow transparent access to the information for all who needs them or who want to have a look. And they organize the semi-autonomy. And semi-autonomy is an important notion because it's the dialectics between the dependency and the autonomy. On the one hand, the producers, the commons or the enterprises are autonomous. They decide for themselves what to do. On the other hand, they cannot decide anything because they are completely dependent on others who produce intermediate products or machines, or they need people to invite to work with them, and so on. So it's a dialectic between dependency and autonomy called semi-autonomy. This is the term used in commons theory. And communist protocols, they work through rules first rules about what to communicate and how. So the protocols say, here you have to fill in your data in a automatically processable syntax. Then you have to fill in the right meanings, the semantics, and you have to fill it in the right time, because we have to synchronize all this information to start the production along the chain. So you have mandatory data which implement the 5-dimensional targets I spoke before, and we have agreements. When all participants in a production chain sign the agreement, then the production can start. So the agreements can play the role of contracts in capitalism, but here we don't have punishments like if you fail to reach your contract, then the state, finally the state, the juridical system is coming and gives you some payments to do, and etc. This we don't have in communism. And I come later to that what the regulatory moments are when we don't have a state and we don't have a powerful institution to suppress single producers, for example. And the protocol-guided communication creates a planning bus. And this is the red one. This planning bus is created by these requirements, the syntax, semantics, and synchronization. So, I'm sorry. I want to go to planning and information traps because it's not so simple. Target planning anticipates an ideal process. Ideally, the process should go that way and produce that and that and that. But on the operational level, you have to deal with a real process, and you always get problems. I'm an engineer. I'm speaking from an engineer viewpoint, so this is important. You have always a deviation between the real and the ideal process. And this is a problem for all planned economies. So from that, you got two planning traps. When you follow a localist approach, then basically you equal planning and processing. planning is identical with processing, with the operational level. So all problems can be dealt with at the operational level. On the other hand, you have the centralist approach, where planning is so far away from processing that the plans move away from the operational level. And this was a problem, for example, in real socialism. The central planners are always running behind the real data of the factories when they try to fulfill the plan on the operational level. So both are not appropriate. You have two information traps. The localist approach is blind for societal needs. And on the other hand, the centralist approach is blind to local conditions. And this is basically an argument which von Hayek gives, that you have that the local decision is made on the basis of local informations and this this is really a problem to overcome. So polycentral planning, the idea of polycentral planning is that the operation or that the planning should be as close to operations as possible, because this allows flexible adjustment of the ideal reality gap you always have. So planning has to be as close to operations as possible. What does this mean? For trans-local goals, you have to think bigger, not in a local fashion, but you have to use meta units who are planning for the operational units, but they don't plan the process, but they plan meta goals that and they propose them to integrate into local planning. So you can imagine to have meta levels of planning, but it depends on the issue, on the task. You can have global issues on the one hand, for example, climate change as a global issue. But global issue not necessarily mean that you have a huge and hierarchical organized planning, because what you need is meta units. In capitalism, we have the IPCC, and you can use the IPCC as an image. We have these meta units proposing what has to be done to deal with the climate change, but they have no power. So yes, in capitalism this is a problem, but you can deal with global issues with using small meta units. On the other hand, to make a line, you can have local issues, local goals, for example, to building a new factory. And this may require large planning units, because they have to concretely plan complex tasks on site. And therefore, for this purpose, you need complex planning bureaus at the site to realize local issues. For example, the chip factories, they need huge planning units. So this is not immediately linked. Global issues are not linked to huge meta units, huge planning units, and local issues are not necessarily local problems. So I come to conflicts. Simon already talked about that. Conflicts can be diverse, but as he said, mostly behind the conflicts are different need conflicts. So what happens when conflicts come up in a production chain? We call it transpersonal conflicts. At this point, I should explain the notion of transpersonality. Transpersonal compared to interpersonal means it's a relationship you have to persons you don't know, to anonymous persons. But in a production chain, you need not to know everyone in the production chain to, for example, come to an agreement. I told before this is done by protocols, but if you have a conflict, for example, your intermediate product delivery cannot deliver it in such amount you need, or something like that, then you have to interpersonalize the conflict and transform it into a conflict loop. You have to gather the people, you see them by person, and then you have to talk about the conflict. And the conflict loop in communism is not about who's making the money and what about the prices and the costs. It's about learning about others' needs, each other's needs, and the priorities in order to find solutions that enclose most of the needs and most of the priorities. It's not always possible to include all of them, but you have to find a proposal which can be accepted by all. And here the regulatory dynamic comes up. The dynamic unfolds between the dependency and autonomy. What does it mean? It means if you say, no, I cannot accept the proposal, then the whole chain cannot produce. So there's a pressure on you to cooperate and to go deeper in the cooperation and the examination of the need conflicts to find a solution, because you want to produce. And you only can produce when others produce too. So there's not a price pressure, which means will you exist in the next year as a company? It's a pressure between the two dialectic aspects of semi-autonomy, which is dependency, and autonomy on the other hand. Only when proposals are accepted, they become effective. So here's another sketch for a more complex situation where planning is done by meta units, which mediate between the productive units, which do the operational level, and the planning bus. They can organize planning for you. So you can have planning bureaus, but not a central one. You can. It's the basic line is these planning units, these meta units, should be as close to the operation level as possible. And this depends on the task, as I tried to sketch before. So if you take this picture and make it on a flat sheet for all of the tasks in society, this is only a small snippet, then you have different planning buses here sketched in red and in green, dotted green. And these meta units, these planning units are interlinked because they have to exchange information, they have to make cooperation between these planning bureaus. And so we have a picture of a polycentral planned economy, which is basically very near to a capitalist map, because in capitalism you have these decentralized but also polycentralized model, but there are these meta units are big companies, for example Amazon or so. They play the role meta units can play in communism. So what I explained, what I talked about, is not only theory, but it's realized as a computer simulation, because Simon and me, we have been part of a project called Society After Money. And in this project, we did a computer simulation on the basis of agent-based modeling. And here we have modeled this communism in a computer model and run it and try to see if it works. And basically, but this is not surprising, it works, because we model it after our thinking, and and it was a bit surprised that we don't have to do so much adjustments. It works basically from the scratch. So we have then a model, a running model of a communist society, and then we put some question in it. For example, we implemented different cultures. So we assume there are narrow-minded people who are focused on productivity. We have ecologically minded people who focus on sustainability and so on. And then our question was, what does this mean for communist society to work? Does they separate from each other? Is there emerging a sphere of productivists or ecologists, and who's surviving in the society, and so on? And this was very interesting. But I don't want to go into detail because it's not the main topic here. So I want to close with some concluding remarks. If power is largely absent, then this leads to inclusion and cooperation. This is what Simon said before. Because if you can oppose power onto someone, then you can force him or her to do something for you. If you have money, you simply buy, and this is a form of power. If power is largely absent, completely is not possible. You always have asymmetrical power residuals, even in communism. But if it's largely absent, you can only reach your goal if you include the others and if you go into cooperations. The reproductive units are semi-autonomous. I talked about that. And interpersonal care is part of the transpersonal provisioning system as a whole. So we don't have a separated sphere, a split of sphere of care, but it's part of the transpersonal provisioning system as a society. More than that, the more than human world is embedded in human activity, because we are nature. We are part of the nature. We are nature. And senso-vital and productive aspects of needs are integrated. Simon talked about that. It's not only about consumption, it's about participation in provisioning. Voluntariness is not the isolated voluntariness of the white male Western man, of the man which is irresponsible of the others. But in communism, voluntariness means responsibility, and it's not opposed to necessity. Simon try to explain that. I would say politics and economics are reconciled. So planning and coordination of social affairs can take place in the same structures. And this can be debated, but I think there isn't a separation between the politics on the one hand and the economy on the other hand. I would say societal affairs, societal questions, societal conflicts have to do with provisioning and producing and preparing for satisfying our needs. And so it has to be integrated in those places where the decision is made what is going to get produced. And the last thing, only one sentence, but some more words. Polycentralized structures are much more stable than central or decentral ones because they are self-similar. Self-similarity is a notion from network theory, and it means if you split the network, the whole network in parts, then you can test if they are stable or if they dissolve. And it's shown that polycentral structures are on each level of focusing are self-similar. So the regional polycentralized structure of the economy and of the political economy is similar to the whole society or to the global society. So this makes them very stable, against catastrophic crashes, damages coming from outside, and so on. And this is not the case for centralized socialism or for decentralized capitalism, because in decentralized capitalism, you have a single point of failure, and this is the monetary system, which links all them together. In communism, you don't have a single point of failure, but you have this self-similarity, which makes it very stable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Before I open the floor to questions and comments, I want to repeat a question that Thomas asked before he had to leave, and he had asked it originally to Simon, but it was more relevant to Stefan's talk or part of the talk. So I'm gonna just start off with that. But in the meantime, please do not be shy with your questions and comments. So Thomas's question is making a direct reference to the paper that was circulated by you on page 11 in the paper. It is proposed that flows of use values are worked out regionally or locally. This sounds very similar to Solnarkozy in Khrushchev era in Soviet planning. This has me worried that the proposal will reconstitute the issues of the late Soviet system compared to the automatic disaggregated planning possible with full logical centralization, which by no means require political centralization. And he adds, the concept of a planning bus and open data may address this, perhaps. So if you have anything to...
My question would be if this answers the question a bit.
Well, he's not here, so I can't.
No,
I
it's not here. Oh.
No, exactly. He had to leave. So that's why I guess you can just attempt a response. And I think Bengi said you would, Bengi would note down the answer, right, and send it to him. Is that what you said?
We're recorded.
No,
anyway.
I said because there's a recording that he can follow the recording. So maybe when he watches the recording, he will have an answer too.
So if I understand the question correctly, then it's the question about the disaggregation of planning in the Soviet system. And is it correct? I'm not so big into the Soviet system.
No, I think his point is that some parts of your model, or at least some discussion of the flows of use values being worked out regionally or locally, something that you refer to in your paper, sounds like it would run into the same problems that Khrushchev era planning has run into. So I think that's kind of that. It sounds he's asking probably how you would differentiate that on page 11, that what you propose as flows of use values being worked out regionally and locally, how that differs from the Khrushchev era planning, and how would it not fall into the same problems, especially environmental problems, I think he had in mind, that that era in Soviet planning fell into.
But for me, it's not clear what problems he tried to address. Simon, do you have an idea? I don't understand this question.
I think it may be about something that's usually that people criticize us for, that it's so decentral, and how, for example, CO2 emission is accounted for on the local level. If everybody can do whatever they want, that what you try to now answer with these protocols and meta comments and global targets.
That's my understanding too from the first time he formulated that, especially kind of environmental problems of certain scale require above local coordination of production.
Yeah. And basically my answer is that planning has to be as close to operations as possible, and this depends on the task. For some tasks you can do it on a local level, and for some tasks you need to go on a higher level and make a bigger planning organization because the task is too complex. For example, if you want to build a bridge, a big bridge, then you need a big planning bureau for that, and so on and so on. It depends on the task. You don't apply one system, one structural system on every task. but the planning structure is designed to the task and not the other way around.
Okay, first is Simon and then Eric. Please go ahead. I mean, I don't know if you want to take the questions one by one, Stefan, or do you want to take like a few and then address them together?
Yeah, a few. Yeah, a few.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Stefan, and thanks, Simon, too. I really enjoyed reading the paper, reading the book you've published last year, I think. And I thank you for commenting on one of our paper on social metabolic planning. I'll try to be as clear as possible. When I read all your arguments about what you want to do, I'm always agreeing and saying, "Oh yeah, that's true," and yes, I agree, and I agree, and I agree. And then comes your proposals. And then I'm always surprised, and probably it comes out of me not understanding them properly. But I try to imagine myself in such a system, and that's the way I always try to do with different models after studying them for a few years now, is to try, like, what would happen if I try to do this, or what would happen if we collectively wants to do that then? And I still cannot see how I would interact in commonism right now. I think my main problem comes from coordination. I don't understand if let's say in my community we want a hospital, to take the example that you've mentioned in your presentation. Where and how do I know that a neighboring community or another polycentral space of planning is not doing exactly the same right now? And how do I know that we will have we will have people coming to this hospital in a level that is that there's enough people coming to the hospital for the type of hospital that we want to do, and that this hospital is enough for the community it will serve? And all those questions that require for me require, I understand it's not your case, but that when I think of them, I need a place where we all meet together between communities, or that there is a central bureau or whatever that says, okay, in this city, we need about like 3 hospitals because that's the amount of people there is. And in terms of transportation to get easily to a hospital, it's better to have 3 than 2, and 4 would be too much. And those kind of evaluation, where do they come from in communism, and how do we have this discussion, and where do we meet? So yeah, I'm, as you can see, I'm a bit confused when it comes to your proposal, but if I see the great interest in them, it's just that I don't understand how it works. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Stefan, do you want to take it because it was not one question, I feel like, or do you want to hear Eric's question? And I don't know, maybe there are links to be made.
Yeah, it's a big question. I try to give an image because our experiences come from the Commons movement, and in the Commons movement, you organize yourself in groups where you try to manage resources or produce them or care for them because you need it or you want to do it because it's important for you. And this gives the image of communism. You organize yourself because you're trying to because something is important for you, but you are not the only one. Others have the same goal, and you find them to organize. It's not different than today. If you have a problem, then people gather together and find an organization. And in capitalism, they make demands to the state, but in communism, they can say, we want to create this or that or that. Then the question of what about the long-term planning or the regional planning? Does it interfere with it? Does it fit into it? Of course, you will have planning institutions who are caring for exactly that question. So my general answer is, if there is a requirement in society, for example, long-term planning in this or that region, you will have an institution who is organizing that. It's the same today, but the place where it is organized is mostly the state. And the state is responsible, and the state is not a one thing. It has differentiated institutions. And if I want to build a house, I have to call the planning institution there and there and there. And I think it's not different in communism. The difference is it's not a state, but it's a self-organized institution which has the goal to deliver these data which are needed to build a hospital, for example, in this or that region. And not one hospital, but 3 and not 4, because it's too much and takes too many resources, for example. So I can understand that it's hard to imagine how self-organization works. And the second thing to know is you don't need to organize all your needs for yourself, because you have so many needs and you have not so much time to organize yourself in thousands of commons organizations to fulfill your needs. But you can trust that other people have the same needs like you, and they are organizing the same for you. So the question is it organized by other people already, or do I have to intervene and to organize myself and to bring in my special view, or is it already running? And the second is, if I organize myself, can I find partners which realize my goals with me together? So you need, for example, some products, the hospital needs some machines, are they available, and so on and so on. And all is integrated in this network. So what you need is information. You can get it from the planning bus as open data. You can imagine, like today, we have open data, and you can, if they are prepared for searching, then today you can have an overview of some city. What about the situation with hospital? This is possible today. And of course, this is possible in communism. You can, for yourself, dig for an image about this or that question. So you have a variety of institutions and commons and enterprises who follow their goals, and your goals are integrated in that. If not, then organize yourself and try to bring a new idea, a new innovation, and so on. I'm not sure if this gives an image. It comes from more from an activist perspective, organizing ourselves and finding social institutions which are appropriate for this goal.
Maybe just one sentence. Maybe if you compare it to Divine's models, in Divine you would have a negotiated coordination body that you can go to and say, we need hospitals because we don't have enough space. And I think in communism, it's kind of similar. You have a place where you can go to and you have people there, but it's not one institution. It is not clear. There may be a negotiated coordination body for your city that is like planning the healthcare or whatever, but there may be different ones. And this is like one of the things that is like, this is kind of a flexible structure where usually in Divine and everything, it's all spelled out, but ours is very bottom up. It's thought in a very bottom up way. So there may be something like this when it makes sense, but there may be two of them and they have conflicting interests and will say we need 5 hospitals for sure, or the other one will say we need polyclinics, and they will have discussions about it. Maybe this is like it's something that helps because it's so thought from bottom up, but I understand your problem. I'm very sorry about it. If you're working for a long time, but it's so difficult to understand.
We are always discussing it between us. Should we give an image? Should we make a picture? Should we draw it and choose the colors no, because this is this is a question that cannot be decided beforehand. It must be decided by the movements and by the societal process. What we have to think of is, are there enough dynamics grasping these motives and these energies and these movements and bring it into a form fulfilling finally all the needs? It's a different approach. So maybe the next question.
Simon, do you have a kind of a follow? I feel like you have a. Are you convinced, or should I move to the other question?
I'll be glad to hear my colleagues' questions since we have only 15 minutes left.
Okay, then I'll take both questions kind of consecutively. Eric, go ahead, please.
Yes, hi everybody. Mine is also quite general, and I think it doesn't only apply to the communism model, but Steph, like you opened up, both of you opened up, I think it was called, okay, use value is the basis of planning. And I'm always asking myself then, okay, use value is this category that's like, when it makes total sense in contrast to exchange value, but then when we talk exchange value, use value, only exchange value is really explored further. And the question of, okay, what actually is use value is, I think, kind of underexplored. And it's also not just an objective thing that something has independently of its context. It's incredibly context dependent. It's also not only an objective thing. Something might have different use values for different people. Not to fall into like subjective theories of value, but different people can do different things or want to do different things with the same thing. And yeah, so basically it goes to the question, okay, is this a stable enough basis to be able to plan on? And, or like, how do you even retrieve information about use value if it's so context dependent? If you cannot say, oh, I have a unit of wood, I know the use value of wood, and then that's enough. It's much more complicated. And yeah, I personally have tried to use the concept of affordance to think more about use value, like from like technical affordances from science technology studies, but that's just on the sidelines here. Yeah, like how do you deal with that problem? Basically, have you integrated that? Yeah.
Yes.
No, Stefan, if you don't mind, I'll get both questions.
Yeah, both. Sorry.
So, okay, so I have a double related question. First, how would you see communism interacting with an eventual other, in a sense? It's like outside the place or the region where the economy or society might be organized in that way. And assuming there's different regions and there's different localities part of this, would you think of a redistribution mechanism of some sort of transfer in between regions in terms of potentialities, or you can see that simply being solved by interaction of different collectives? And thanks for the very stimulating talk. It's very interesting.
Go ahead, Stefan, please.
Okay. To the use value. Well, we have big debates in between our group if it is good to use value, but it's mostly understandable for a lot of people. I did not prefer to use this word. So your proposal, affordance, for example, I find a good idea. I didn't like the term use value because it's the other side of exchange value, and this doubles is a pair which comes from capitalism. So use value is not only usability or something like that. It's a special form of consumption in capitalism. So I do not prefer this word, but a lot of people understand it better than other words. So it's a compromise. Affordance, for example, what we in our book, we talked about the means to satisfy needs. So it's not about the debate of needs or use values. It's about the debate, what do we want to produce? And then you have to be very clear, do we need this or that, or more red, or a little triangle at this? And this is the level we have to talk about, not on the level of general use value. Is it useful or not useful? It's for some useful in that way, and in another way for others. And this differentiation we have to bring into planning. If I understand you correctly, your question was, what about communism when interacting with capitalist external regions, right? Or do you mean...
or any other system organized in a different way, really?
Yeah, okay.
But let's say with capitalism. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's a big question because we assume that capitalism will not peacefully accept the existence of any alternative system, be it only that the system is using resources that capitalism wants, having people which are possible buyers, and so on and so on. So we are not sure how to deal with, for example, military threats. So it's completely unclear, and we try to not answer this in the field of the utopian model, but in the field of transition from capitalism to alternative system into hopefully communism. And in this transition period, the question is really important, how to deal with military forces, for example, or with old institutions which have to be overcome, but they stick to their function and will not leave their tasks, and so on and so on. A lot of different questions, difficult questions. Okay. Simon, you want to add?
I think use value is I use but I think it's the same thing as need oriented. It's just like we use it in this way. It's just a need orientation, and you can see it within the structure as use value orientation, but you also can say need orientation. And Matthew, I think what you said, I think Bengi and Simon they wrote an article about international relations, but I think it's really difficult. I think it's like underexplored in all our models. And Sophie. Yeah, and I think it's like, because on the one hand you have this economic dependency, and that you have to reorganize, and then there's always the problem, how can you have to interact, of course, with capitalism, but I think we really have to go in depth into the real socialist experience that we had, and then use the paper that Jeris wrote, but because it's much more normative, and then we can use, because I like the paper, but we have to use these norms, and then how would we have dealt with these norms with the real socialist problem there? And I don't know enough about the real socialist for an economic policy. I know that it was a huge problem for them. And in the 80s, they started to like export at all prices. We just need the currency to buy good stuff. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, we have 6 minutes. If you have anything else to add, or Sophie has a question. Go ahead, Sophie.
Yeah, I can go quick. I don't know if you went back to the idea of contracts, but I was interested to see how you imagine, because I have the impression that agreements and personal agreements between different people and different collectives maybe are really central to polycentric governance. And how do you imagine the regulation of these contracts, or kind of the enforcement, or maybe it wouldn't be enforcement, but yeah.
Yeah, well, there is no authority to enforce contracts or agreements. We call it agreements because to pick it out of the legal sphere, and you don't have a state and you don't have a central authority to make punishments if you don't fulfill your contract and so on. The only regulative motivation comes from the cooperation, because you are interested in cooperation as the other is interested. If you refuse to cooperate, then it's bad for you too. You can look for another company, for example, to cooperate with, and this gives more regulative pressure onto the company which is delivering, for example, the same intermediate product you need. So the regulation comes from these two angles, from the ability to decide for yourself, called autonomy, and from the dependency. You are completely dependent from others producing for you. But the other way around is true. So this double dependency, which is the normal situation in any society, we are dependent from each other. But capitalism organizes this dependency in form of power relations. If you have money, you don't have to think of cooperation. You buy. If you have military, you don't think of cooperation. You go into the country, and so on and so on. So for communism, the regulative motivation comes from the will and the wish to cooperate, because it's the only way to have to fulfill my goals. A lot of people leaving.
Now it's us. I think like one thing that I wanted to because I already told you that it's the first time that I heard Stefan talking about it. I think like our model is really good in this bottom-up, completely decentralized democracy. That's like also one main thing. But I have the feeling that we really have to synthesize the different models because they have different strengths. For example, when I heard you talking about these small media units giving guidelines for global issues, when I read it with Saros, and Saros has a similar concept, I thought, oh wow, that's very technocratic, because you can't say what the CO2 emissions should be. It's a political decision. And this is like, for example, what we tease Pendergrass in their Half of Socialism, like make it as a very convincing point that they say, we can't have just say, these are the CO2 emissions, now go for it. But it's a political decision, and then we have the land issues and all this kind of stuff. And these are things, and it's like where it's difficult for me, because I come from the decentralized perspective. We need kind of a collective, centralized decision-making process on this, and then but still focusing on this decentralized method of planning. But you can combine it, kind of have global targets, because more or less every decentral model, apart from our own, like Divine and Perican and everything, they always have like central goals. With Divine, you always have like central goals, what you wanted, consumption and CO2 emissions and whatever. And then you have to negotiate coordination bodies that tell the people what to do. So we don't have this, and I think I'm just asking myself if it works or if it doesn't. Because you introduced like now global targets and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we have debates about this, and I think we can imagine that my classical example is the IPCC. If we can understand this as a commons, it's a self-organized body of scientists thinking about the future of the planet, and they make proposals, but they don't decide. The decision for 1.5 or 2 degree is a political one. That's true. But the scientists would say they will tell another story. And the interesting thing is the scientist story. And this is debatable in this society too. But it's not, I would say, the political decision can be done in self-organized structures. And it's not a thing that you have to vote globally for. I trust in a society where my needs are basically part of the needs of the others. There, in such a society, I would trust scientists that they are following the right path for saving the planet. And if I like to, I can check it out. It's like open source software, because all of the data are open, and I'm a scientist too. I can dig into their proposal and find the holes, the problematic points, and can start a debate and so on and so on. But I don't need to. It's the same with open source software. I use open source software. I'm running on a Linux system because I trust this principle of open sourceness. There can be people who are looking into the source code, so I can trust them that this is not, there are not viruses and so on integrated in the software. I can't trust closed systems.
Well, okay, it's officially past 1 right now, but it was wonderful. It was really, really fascinating, at least for me, and very stimulating. I think the questions and the debate was equally valuable. So thank you for both of you for being a part of our series, and of course Simone and Sophie and my comrades who contributed to the debate. And as far as I know, the video will be circulated in the our closed email list. And then hope to see you in the following events. I think your contribution and participation would be very, very valuable.
Yeah,
And,
thank you very much for inviting. Sorry, Simon.
Well, thank you all. The next, I was just saying that the next event is April 4th with Martin Arboleda from Chile, who will be with us on April 4th. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bengi, for facilitating all of this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us. Thank you, Bengi. Thank you all of you.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.